quick wins in the Teagasc Mac curve, like, the protected urea, the less, the crude protein being big ones. Like, get rid of any unproductive animals straight away. Like, they shouldn't be hanging around, because they're like, the longer an animal is on the farm and not productive, then there's emissions that there's no euro sign attached to, essentially. Like, to extend the grazing season as long as you can, because emissions when they're outdoors are less versus when they're indoors.
I'm Stuart Childs, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy Podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. Teagasc's Rural Economy Division in Athenry have been recording sustainability data with a number of years as part of the National Farm Survey. The 2022 report was published in October and shows downward movement in the emissions from farms. I asked Cathal Buckley, researcher based in Athenry, to tell me about the report, and I started by asking him to outline some of the numbers in terms of farms and area farmed in the survey.
Focusing specifically on the specialised dairy farms, and we use the EU Farm Accounting Data Network typology to define those. It's basically all European countries have to report in different typologies. Basically, these farms are where 2/3 of the growth of the money output is coming from milk. That's the kind of the general definition of a specialist dairy farm in the NFS. We have data on 262 farms in 2022. Now we get a population weight from the Central Statistics Office based on size and system. So they're representing about 16,500 specialist dairy farms nationwide. Their average farm size is about 65 hectares. Average herd size is about 92 cows. Average stocking rate is about 2.1.
Okay, so that's basically, that's where when people hear about the average dairy farm in the country, this is the figure that's been quoted on that 92. It's creeping up ever so slightly, bit by bit, over the last few years, but it's probably reaching its kind of upper limit now at this stage in reality. So just in terms of, as I said, we're going to concentrate on the kind of the environmental aspects and the innovation pieces of the study that you've reported there. The financials will be part of the Outlook conference and things from tomorrow. Just in light of the performance of 2022, just explain some of the environmental standards that you've been setting there, and we'll say what have people achieved and where are they delivering and where are we failing to deliver, I suppose. Now that's a long question, so I might split that up a small bit, but
I guess, okay, look, and when we talk about environmental sustainability, there's three legs to the stool. There's gaseous emissions, which is GHG and ammonia. You have your water quality, which we look at kind of nitrogen and phosphorus balances. And we have our biodiversity, which we're still working on, trying to generate metrics there. So we have focus maybe first on the gaseous emission side, on the greenhouse gases. So we basically replicate what the EPA do at a national level, when they report Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions to the UN, the United Nations, and under the various protocols. We replicate that, and it's at a country level essentially. So from a dairy perspective, 2022 the greenhouse gas emissions actually declined on a farm basis and a per hectare basis. What drove that? Basically, although animal numbers were increasing, the chemical fertiliser type and quantity, all that quantity reduced, but also the type of fertiliser they applied was probably more beneficial from a GHG perspective, in that CAN is lower emission rates than things like urea and protected urea and so on and so forth. So like from a emissions perspective, GHG emissions, it went down. The opposite was the story with the ammonia, unfortunately. Now ammonia, we're on the hook big time for ammonia. We have this EU directive called the NEC Directive, National Emission Ceiling Directive, where we have a target and we failed to meet that target in 8 of the last 10 years. Ammonia went the wrong direction. Why? Basically, because it was the profile of, I said type and quantity is important. A lot of farmers, because of the price of fertilizer, substitute a lot to straight urea. Now, straight urea is rocket fuel in terms of ammonia emissions compared to protected urea, or CAN for that matter. And so that really drove the increase in ammonia emissions, as well as slightly increasing herd sizes, because a lot of the ammonia emissions kind of relate to the animal in terms of manure management when they're housed.
Okay. And you said there about I suppose to be fair to farmers, there wasn't a whole lot they could do in terms of choice of fertilizer in the early part of 2022. It was kind of take it or leave it. We would have had a number of farms that we would have been dealing with that ended up getting a half load of protected urea and a half load of straight urea, even though they'd looked for the full load of protected. But it's still probably important to kind of focus on that a small bit, Cathal, from the point of view of that the overall, in terms of the amount of protected urea that has been used, it's probably still a small
Yeah,
proportion. It's the smaller proportion of the straight nitrogen that's still being bought into the country. And is that one of the main innovations, is the term that you use for it there? And people might find that strange to see it as an innovation when spreading fertilizer. How is that an innovation? But it's the type of fertilizer we're using.
yeah.
Like to drive change, we really, really have to double down our efforts in terms of trying to use more and more protected urea.
Correct, Stuart. Yeah. So, like, I think dairy farms, about 14% of the overall chemical was in the form of protected urea. Good from an ammonia perspective, it's massively important to get the straight urea out of the system and protected urea. It's a bit of a trade-off here when it comes to ammonia and GHG. Look, CAN is very good from an ammonia perspective, but very bad from a GHG perspective when it comes versus protected urea.
Mm.
So protected urea is kind of the balance there in terms of better than straight urea for ammonia and better than CAN for GHGs. So really, like, the message in terms of chemical fertilizer is, if you're going to apply it, please apply it in terms of the straight element anyway, in terms of protected urea. Like, the two main things that drive emissions here, like, are animal numbers and how they're fed, and chemical fertilizer use. So, we've seen massive increases in fertilizer prices the last few years, 2 years in particular, like 300%. So, a hedge for farmers against this high price, because we can't control it. We're not manufacturers of fertilizer. We're kind of price takers here, real price takers. So, hedge against the external pressure on prices would be things like multi-species swards and clover, where you can fix nitrogen from the environment, and then you're less reliant on this imported chemical fertilizer. Okay, I know there's more management, and I suppose things can potentially go wrong with clover multi-species swards, but I think the investment is really worth it, like, in terms of the reducing your risk to the external shocks we're probably more likely to see going forward with the kind of geopolitical situation we face. Like, there's no guarantee the prices and fertilizer won't be so volatile in the future. And the
Yeah,
other,
so it's quite volatile economics or yeah, political situation currently, and it's hard to believe in 2023 that we could be dealing with kind of two significant war
yeah,
things occurring in the country, in the world. So yeah, so your point is basically that the way we can reduce both our GHGs and our ammonia in particular is by reducing the amount of fertilizer that we're applying, and the fertilizer that we do apply has to be in the form of protected urea for the nitrogen element of it, and then say we can go into the details of how you manage your nutrient management and so forth around the P's and the K's and another day.
sure. I suppose the other element I want to mention, Stuart, is the liming element.
Mm.
Like, it's important, obviously, from a nutrient use efficiency perspective, to get your pH for grass at 6.3 or thereabouts. Now, I suppose there's a story around lime. When you apply lime on a once-off basis, and we saw this in some of the signpost farms, you get a pulse in the year. You get a kind of GHG, because it emits CO2 directly when you apply lime in the year it's applied, which could jack up your farmer's GHG emissions on a once-off basis. But I suppose the return to that then is, like, it's technical. Some of the science would say, if you get your pH right, and you could get an extra 90 kgs of N and maybe 5 of P from the soil naturally. That's the key point here in terms of the mitigation of applying lime, is farmers should be reducing their chemical end on the back of it. And that's a hard enough message to sell, because if farmers don't reduce their fertilizer on the back of liming, then they're actually going to increase their emissions, when they're realizing probably more natural N and P from the system.
Okay. And is there any justification then for kind of being more consistent about your liming as well? That there's a regular amount of lime with plus or minus a load kind of type scenario going out every year.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. If you can, if you do 20-25% of farm every year, then you'll keep your your emissions, we'll say, at a fairly constant rate from the liming, and hopefully you can reduce your chemical N on the back of that then and reduce your emissions.
And I suppose the other point in it then is if you get, obviously there's probably going to be a scenario if you're low on pH that you're going to have to take the hit at some point. But if you do get it to a certain point and you're maintaining,
Yeah,
then like you said there, the ability to reduce the nitrogen fertilizer is more consistent rather than in the peaks and troughs of high pH where it should be dropping off down to a low pH where you're not getting the response and finding, oh, my fertilizer isn't working so great and I'll put out a bit more to try to compensate for it type scenario. So
absolutely.
the other and again it has an ammonia element on it as well. The low emission slurry spreading has gone up quite a bit, especially in the dairy side.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
No, in fairness, like through regulation and I suppose extension efforts, like I think about 75% of the slurry being applied in dairy farms is through less, which is great. Again, look, we're probably we'd like to get it closer to 100 if possible down the line. But like, if you have a choice between, you know, a contractor or whatever, like, make sure they're using the less element because you're saving nitrogen. Again, you should be reducing. There's nitrogen use efficiencies there from less versus splash bait, like where you're gaining in, like, so again, you could probably reduce your chemical fertilizer on the back of that as well, like, depending on how much you're applying in a given field and so on and so forth, like,
yeah, absolutely. So, just in we'll say the actual total emissions, then I suppose, how do we work out in dairy terms versus the other sectors? Like we are the highest emitters effectively.
Yeah.
Obviously the imposition then is on the dairy farmer to get the biggest gains in order to achieve this 25% reduction that we're talking about. But just to quantify it, I suppose the average farm size that you've spoken about there, around the 64, 65 hectares, 92 cows. What are the emissions coming from those like?
Yeah, it's about 606 tons of GHG in 2022, down from 616 in 2021. So there was a decline of fairness. It's about 9.4 tons per hectare in 22 versus 9.6 in 21. Ammonia as well, it's about 3 tons in 2022, it's up from 2.89 in 2021. Basically how we quantify that, and like that, those levels are about 4 to 5 times higher than your non-dairy systems, your cattle, your sheep, and your arable. Why is that? Look, because you've significantly higher livestock kind of stocking rate and chemical fertilizer application rates. To be honest, like if you want to look track emissions, there's two things you can eyeball is your animal numbers and your chemical fertilizer use. Like the animal numbers, the herd sizes have been edging. Like I put up this graph every year in terms of farmers' carbon footprint of the milk, the number of output of milk per cow, and then the herd size. And the first two, there's been efficiency gains, and the farmers are generating more milk output per cow at a lower carbon footprint. But the herd size has been linear in terms of increasing. That's what's essentially have been driving all along. We're still seeing slight increases in the dairy herd size, maybe 1.5% the last 2 years, 2022, and it's looking like the same in 2023. So like if a farmer has a steady state herd, like they can do stuff. Let's say a lot of stuff to reduce their emissions. It's going to be very like I'll be honest with you. 75% of the emissions are kind of related to the animal when it comes to GHG in terms of methane. Like, no, we don't have a lot of tools in the box yet for methane. Like, we're working on feed additives, stuff like that. Like, which hopefully down the line will be a big help to us. But at the moment, we don't have a lot of mitigation linked directly to the animal. Like, we can do things like reducing the crude protein and concentrates where when they're out grazing it doesn't need to be at 18-19%, maybe 14 and 15 is also required. You can get rid of unproductive animals. In the longer term, you can look at dairy EBI, kind of breeding for lower emitting methane animals and so on and so forth. But like the hard the hard and fast rule is like if your herd size is increasing and it's increasing at a significant rate, then we find it very difficult to reduce your emissions.
And Carl, I suppose that creates problems for people in terms of getting their head around it, I think, in that I want to expand, for example. Now, obviously, with what's happened with nitrates and so forth, the idea of expansion maybe is getting a little bit less appetizing or appealing maybe than it has been in the past because of all that'll be going with it in terms of extra storage and so forth. And like, is what you're doing here or what you're measuring here actually does it have to put a lid on people's aspirations or expectations of what they want to do and with their own farm. Because I think you said at the start there that this is at a national level, I suppose, that it's Ireland that we're talking about here. It's not talking about Cathal Buckley's farm or Stuart Childs' farm.
Yeah,
It's
correct.
so
No,
like if
there's
I
no
have
farm.
aspirations to drive on, I can do that, but I still, that's not to say that I don't continue to focus on driving that per unit measure down.
Correct. Look at there's two things we like. We look at in terms of like our client. We're a food exporting country, like so the carbon footprint of the milk is very hugely important to say. Look, we're producing this liter of milk or kg of milk at a low carbon footprint, which that's very important, especially from the processor side. Like trying to sell this on external markets. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is the absolute emissions, and our competitors are increasingly looking at us and say, how can you say you're green, like if your absolute emissions are going up year on year,
Mm.
now, like there's no farm specific target or constraint here outside of what you said about the nitrates, to be honest.
Yeah.
But from a GHG perspective, ammonia perspective, there's no kind of limit or there's no restriction on farmers. Like if one dairy farmer goes up and the other goes down, they're counterbalancing, and that's what we're seeing. At a national level, we're seeing some of the suckler cows being taken out of the system, So the thing is, like it's not a one for one ratio.
Yeah, yeah.
If
Five
you
times the difference, as you said there earlier.
it's like a dairy cow emits 1.5 times the emissions of a suckler cow, so you need 1.5 suckler cows if for every dairy cow you're adding to the system. But there's nothing individually to say you can't maximize or can't do whatever, bar outside the nitrates directive, which is going to be a big issue in terms of how it's implemented. But I suppose farmers can do what they can do in terms of the technologies, do your protected urea, do your less, do your, hopefully feed additives might be a big help, going forward. Do your crude protein, measurement, like in terms of the ammonia stuff, covering of stores, slurry amendments probably down the line, some of the measures have dual purpose in terms of ammonia and GHG, like less protected urea and crude protein, for example, be the main three.
Yeah, and you mentioned the crude protein there already, and how that's been implemented under the nitrates derogation and rules really in the last couple of years, and it's this co-benefits that they talk, isn't it? Really, that they're would say, and so the reduction is helping from a nitrate point of view, but it's also helping from a GHG point of view as well. Just on the nitrogen use efficiency piece, I suppose, then Carl, just as you mentioned, nitrates. Obviously very topical at the moment, the whole nitrates piece, but I suppose nitrogen use efficiency is it's around with a long time, but it's lingo that we haven't really been using on farms hugely in the last up until the very recent years. So where are we sitting at in terms of the dairy systems with their nitrogen use efficiency according to your figures?
Yeah, we do a farm gate balance, what's called farm gate nitrogen balance. So look, we track what comes onto the farm in nitrogen terms. What does that mean? Well, it means how much N is coming in fertilizer, how much N is coming in concentrated feeds, how much N is coming in forage feeds. Are they importing organic slurry? Are they importing buying livestock? Everything is put back into the kg event, and then far side, what goes out, how many kgs of nitrogen go out in milk and cull cows and grain and so on and so forth. One minus the other gives you your surplus, and that's kind of the higher the surplus, the higher the pressure on the local environment. All other things being equal, now we know that in water quality that covers a lot because some biophysical places can take a higher surplus than others based on the local hydrology and soil and so on and so forth. But what we've seen is that dairy farmers have reduced that surplus over the last few years. It was over 200 in 2018, which was a bit of a freak year, but it's now the most recent times it's down to 158 at the moment. And on the flip side, the use efficiency has got up to 27.7%, which is the highest I've seen in a long time, because it was low 20s when we first started doing this in 2013. It was low 20s, so now farmers. And there are significant incentives for them to optimize on fertilizer because of the price of it, the last couple of years, and they have responded to that, and I think there are more opportunities there, in terms of, I keep saying, clover and multi-species, to reduce that kind of fertilizer that balance lower again, but the numbers on the nitrogen and the phosphorus side are all going in the right direction, which is good from a water quality perspective, and hopefully that will be seen in the water quality down the line. But look, a lot depends on say, on the local environment, because what's good in one area mightn't be good in the other, you know.
Yeah, and if effectively what you're saying there, Cathal, when you talk about the surplus piece, moving away again, it's a bit like the GHGs. The efficiency could be really, really good, but if there just happens to be a very, very high surplus, the risk of loss is greatly increased. So, because again, the animal is at fault here because the animal is in the middle. They're kind of inefficient because relative to the tillage operations, you could be up on 80 or 90% inefficiency there. Um, the the objective is to keep to basically use enough nitrogen to grow the grass that you want to grow, that you need to grow. And if there's a little bit spare, okay, that's not too bad. But if there's a lot to spare, obviously that's a major impact on the environment because of the risk of that being lost to the groundwater and to the streams and rivers subsequently. So you've seen progress there. You've seen progress in terms of the fertiliser change, but obviously we need more. Is there anything else that people need to look at in terms of changing here that we can impact? Like, I think the big thing here for farmers in general is that we get the impact as fast as possible so that we can try to change that narrative, because I know from talking to clients, they are so tired of getting kicked all the time about, and it's come up again in an article recently there. I think actually one of the farm organisations had an article about the number of flights that people are taking has actually been promoted upwards, and yet farmers have been told that their cows are the problem. So just like what can people, is there anything else that we haven't covered that people should be doing? And of the things that you have covered there, how quickly should we be moving in these directions and to try to get the fastest level of change? And if that's instantly, say that too, like.
Yeah, well, look, like, to be honest, we've kind of covered most of the ground, like stuff that's kind of quick wins in the Teagasc Mac curve, like, you know, the protected urea, the less, the crude protein being big ones. Like, get rid of any unproductive animals straight away. Like, they shouldn't be hanging around, because they're like, the longer an animal is on the farm and not productive, then there's emissions that there's no euro sign attached to, essentially, like, to extend the grazing season as long as you can, because emissions when they're outdoors are less versus when they're indoors. I know, like, that's not weather dependent, like, so it's outside the farm's control, mainly.
Yeah,
But if the weather suits, like, try and get them, and that's Teagasc standard policy, I suppose, down through the years. It's the graze grass and so on and so forth. Like, keep an eye out for added, like, there are slurry additives and feed additives that will be coming on the market hopefully in the next year or two, well, a year, two, three. I don't know, whenever they're approved, like, and they could be game changers. But in the meantime, I suppose, look, do what you can in terms of those productive animals, the chemical fertilizer, the low emission slurry spreading, the clover, the multi-species. Get that expensive chemical fertilizer out as much as you can out of the system, which will be a positive economic story as well as an environmental story.
okay, so and I suppose just to highlight in terms of the additives that you're talking about there at the moment, as it currently stands, there isn't anything that's commercially available for farmers to buy really as such right now in Ireland, that is approved. So there's a lot of stuff being sold, but they're not going to give you any
No,
advantages. Yeah,
no, and the way we get credit for this is, like, it has to be there has to be verifiable stuff that farmers bought X amount of an additive, either by sales or through recording of the National Farm Survey. Because, for example, well, we see the change in the low emission slurry spreading, and it's through the data in the National Farm Survey that the EPA actually take our numbers and say, okay, farmers have gone 75 dairy farmers have gone to this, so
yeah,
they need evidence of that. Like, it's the same here. So there are some slurry additives on the market, but again, they're not, they're small, and they're not being tracked essentially in terms of the inventories. Like, the feed additives, what's out there is what they call 3-NOP, like
yeah,
bovarting, a commercial name for it.
yeah.
Not really suited from an Irish system, because it needs to, we're more suited from an indoor system in terms of constant, I suppose, ingest in terms of the feed profile, where it's difficult when you're out there out grazing to get this into them. Very positive stuff coming out of a project led by Sinead Waters in terms of it's called MetaBait, like the bioglass, and in NY Galway, to look at these additives, maybe that could be in a pellet form to be fed to dairy cows twice a day. Seem to have preliminary results seem to be very positive from that. But again, from the time you prove the trials to getting it certified can be a bit of a lag time, But there's some green shoots there and encouraging signs for farmers, because if we can get something to address the methane element, like, then we're really kind of making progress in the longer term.
Yeah, so that's just basically coming back to, as you said, that there's 60 to 70% of the emissions are coming from the animal themselves, so they're the main source. And
Yeah.
while people might say we're only tinkering around the edges with all the other stuff, it's very, very important that we do all that tinkering, and then
Yeah.
we get the big gain then when we do ultimately get something that will work, because we will get something that will work. There's no doubt about it. Like, we've risen to the challenges in the past at an industry level, and we'll do it again into the future. So I suppose, Carl, just to sum up the report for 2022, is a kind of going back to that Fianna Fáil slogan, a lot done, more to do.
Yeah, look at the economics, and like in terms of, we haven't talked about the economics and social, but like the dairy farms are a lot more economically and socially sustainable than the other systems. Well, tillage aside, definitely more than the livestock systems. They were a powerhouse in 2022, like the record milk price and so on. So from a economic and social perspective, and that they're as important as the environment, because if you're not socially sustainable, economically sustainable, then people won't stay in the sector in the longer term. So if we want a dairy industry, then we need those economics and social as much as we need the environmental. Now the environmental, look at the green shoots. The GHG is going down, and the ammonia is concerned. To be honest, this year we're seeing maybe less fertiliser again. 18% is what's out in the media. We haven't seen the final figures, and CAD and ammonia have gone down. So there's probably good news story brewing on 2022 when it comes to emissions. Herd size is up slightly again on the dairy side, so it depends how much on the dairy side the fertilizer's gone down versus the increase in the herd size, to see where we're down. It's probably going to be down slightly on 2022. To be honest, I'm doing some projections here for the Outlook conference tomorrow, so it's looking that way. But once we see the final numbers, we won't know for sure. But from a farmer's perspective, things that can have the win-wins, like the unproductive animals, the multi-species sward, the clover, anything to get down the fertilizer would be well worth looking at in the coming year.
So effectively, the objective that all dairy farmers should have for 2024, is to reduce their chemical nitrogen application rates, but they can only achieve that by bringing in something to replace that chemical nitrogen if they want to maintain the stocking rates that they have and so forth. So there's a kind of a bit of a hill to climb there, but people need to start getting to the bottom of the hill anyway to start to climb it. So,
well, it's worth exactly investing in time to study it anyway, like in terms of what other farmers and researchers have done. Like, there's a lot of work there in things like Solihead and Moore Park and Curtains, like in terms of the clover, especially like multi-species. We're still young enough in terms of the research, like, but all the signs are that it has potentially positive from a biomass and an animal health perspective. So it's I appreciate that there's more management involved, and it's a bit of a change of direction in terms of grassland management. But like with the volatility in the chemical fertilizer prices we're likely to see going forward, I think farmers definitely need to look for it as a hedge against this.
Yeah, so look, I think that's a good point to finish on, Cathal. That's good advice in relation to reducing that reliance on an external source of nitrogen. So thanks, Cathal, for coming on today and talking to us about the sustainability results. We look forward to that, and thank you very much for your time.
No problem.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Cathal Buckley for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.